I'm really passionate about parallel community because it's actually a result of a very long lifetime with a whole string of experiences. But it's an attempt actually to use modern technology to try and make a change in our quality of life, and then bridging over the political aspect and getting to a higher level of perception actually of a real quality of life. We're here this morning at Boscawen, which is one of the most magical stone circles in the West Penwith. This has led me all over the world to look into the knowledge of the ancient people, the kind of people who put this thing up. Their life was so much more honest and so much more simple than ours. In the same way as the old Waitaha in New Zealand, they were deeply concerned with each other, they cared for each other, and they were in harmony with nature. They recognised that there was something way beyond their 5 centuries. I'd really like you to join in sharing some of the experiences I've had in my lifetime. Bear with me, because some sceptics might think are a bit outrageous, but they actually happened to me. And I'd love you to come with me to understand why I feel the way I feel. I'm Hamish, I'm a blacksmith, I'm a metal sculptor. I do a bit of writing, I work with trees, and I work with the land, and I work with healing the land, and that sounds a bit funny, but I do heal land and people as well. I live here in Cornwall with my wife Bar, and we have 12 acres of the most wonderful woodland, which takes quite a lot of looking after. And thank goodness Bar does most of the work. I really wanted to set up Parallel Community because of a whole series of events that happened, leading towards an enormous dissatisfaction with the way the world was going on at the moment. The people who were making the major decisions, and the whole business about this incessant business of going to war for any region at all. And I set it up because I think I was inspired by Buckminster Fuller, who said you can't actually tilt at well-established systems, and the only way to get around them was to provide an alternative which was better. And the only way I could think of doing that was to set up a new community, were aware of the people around them and cared for them and looked after them, and were independent from the whole national systems of providing food and electricity and things like that. And it seems to be a huge step, but it's the only logical one that I can see that was going to work. And I set up Parallel Community because if enough people get together, they have a loud enough voice to make themselves heard. You know, when I talked about the whole project, there were so many people who agreed entirely, and they said, yeah, we agree with you that these are terrific problems, but what can I do? And I wanted to answer that one, and the only answer to me is something like Parallel Community. But it's not I, it's us. What can we do? Can we take our power back? Can we make our own decisions? Can we become independent? Can we be without fear? And will my grandchildren come to me and say, okay, you did try and do something at least, because you knew there was something wrong. Like everybody else, I was in the rat race for a long time, and I had a factory and 100 people, and my world was the survival in the factory and the making stuff and selling it and doing all the things that one does, and total involvement. I just accepted that the work ethic was the big thing, and I can understand how people get absolutely trapped into that because you believe it's the most important thing in the world, and in fact it's not. There are values that are much more important than just surviving the economic battle. I suppose I'm one of the lucky ones because I was seriously involved in the whole commercial game of earning a living and looking after kids and coping with a mortgage and all that sort of thing. But I was lucky in that I have had some really extraordinary experiences in my lifetime that that are way beyond the normal of people's living. And I have to admit that when I was running the factory, I had no idea. And if I'd heard myself speaking then, I would have said, you've flipped, you've fallen off your trolley or whatever. But now I'm desperately trying to imply that there is a set of values which is infinitely more valuable than the commercial ones. That there are spiritual values, and as soon as you say spiritual, people think it's a religious thing. It's not. It's nothing to do with that. It's a moving into an understanding of why we're here, and our relationship with the earth and the cosmos, and with particularly with our neighbours, our friends and neighbours, and we've lost this whole business of being in community. There was a time when the old grandmothers and would look after the kids, and it would be like a much wider family in their way of living. But nowadays we have nothing to pull us together cohesively. Community to me is quite simply caring. It's about caring for people who are less capable of coping with life than you are. And a lot of that we've completely lost in this tremendous battle we have just to survive. Well, the business developed, it's one of these inevitable things that anybody in business knows about. I mean, we started off with 10 people, and then it began to get difficult for me to find enough work for 10 people, so I decided we need a rep. And once you need a rep, you go from 10 people to 25 people because you've got to pay for the rep and all that system that keeps going up. And then we developed, and eventually we were employing 100 people. It started off as an engineering project, and I loved working with steel and iron and things like that. And it was in a little cowshed. And the development from the cowshed to a factory employing 100 people was immensely satisfying. But at that time, it left me with absolutely no margin for anything else in my life at all. It became a sort of nightmare. On this train, you couldn't get off. And this is the situation. I see people in it all the time. And I really would like to introduce them to the fact that it is not 100% virtuous to just work. 100 people is a big mouth to feed in furniture manufacturing. You have to have regular contracts, and we did that. We were getting accolades and write-ups for export all over the country. We had our furniture in every embassy in the world practically, and it was going very successfully. I realised eventually after a while that I wasn't doing the design work that I enjoyed. It was frantic stuff to try and cope with or get work in, and there was no joy about it at all. And I eventually felt I was just a sort of wet nurse for 100 people and dealt with all their problems. I felt that there was a dimension missing, and at that time I didn't know what I know now. We worked with the Japanese and Mitsubishi and people like that, and one of the cathartic things that happened is a very small thing, like pushing a switch. I'd had a long hard day, and I was about 2 miles from the house, and I looked over and there was a beautiful red gold sunset, and on the crest of the edge of the field these black oak trees with their branches all there, and I thought, God, that's so beautiful. I wish I had time to look at it. And something clicked inside. What are you talking about? You have got time. Stop the car. Which I did, and I sat there, not in the car. I went over to the fence and leaned on this fence, and I watched the sun go down. And it was a cathartic moment, because it was probably the turning point of realizing that what I was doing wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I think it was a month later, I was coming down the track to do the same sort of thing again, to go up to London to talk about some furniture and all that sort of thing. Beautiful morning, and I had a very old 14th century house, drive down 5 acres of land in Sussex. And I had a gardener who used to come part-time. And as I was coming down, this gardener came in his battered old van, and he pulled onto the grass, and as I passed, tearing up to London, he looked out and he just grinned at me and shook his head. And I thought, God, you've got it right. You are going to spend this beautiful day in this beautiful place in Sussex, and I, in order to employ you, are going up to London. And that was another cathartic moment. I said, I've got it completely wrong. That started the whole business of the realization that the race was not worth a candle, that the money behind it was not worth a candle. It was the communication with people and nature that was really worthwhile. And that was a significant turn in my whole life. We were working on the top end of the market, and on the top end of the furniture market is the competition is totally global, and the stress of doing that is quite enormous. And then there was a little bit of a turn down with the recession of the late 70s, which was very difficult to write. And one of my directors died, and I said I'll just take over what he's doing, because we really can't afford to get somebody else in this thing. And the other one, the financial one, went out to New Zealand. And right in the middle of all of that, I was taken suddenly ill on one Thursday evening. Found myself whisked to hospital on the Friday, was operated on the Saturday, and in the middle of the operation, I died. I had an out-of-the-body experience which profoundly changed my thinking on absolutely everything, because it is a unique experience. You don't have to go through it to get through into a stage of understanding what we're talking about, but it helps. And to me, I was so rigidly into the disciplines of manufacture that I hadn't really had time to think about other things. And it profoundly changed my thinking. I had to wipe out the company. Actually, just was taken out by the bank, and I retreated to Cornwall. This hill at the back here has always drawn me. It's drawn me for years, and I had to find a way of living. Now, I had been working on every Wednesday evening, being taught blacksmithing by my works director. So when I came down here, I said, "What am I going to be?" Because when I was 6 years old, my mother asked me what I wanted to be, and I said, "I want to be a blacksmith." And she said, no, you must get a proper job. And I said, "Well, what is a proper job?" And she said, "A doctor or a dentist or a lawyer or a civil servant." And I said, "What does a civil servant do?" She said, "I don't know, but it's a proper job." Anyway, I after 53 years, I thought, when I came down here, I will earn a living as a blacksmith. And I have never regretted a moment of giving up the manufacturing bit, giving up the big money side. Actually, it's a very huge advantage for me now to have been in a position at one time of making a lot of money, because I recognise the real value of that, which is very little indeed. I came back here after I had my near-death experience, and I found this hugely restful, magical place. The view all the way around, I think it's one of the finest views in Europe, and it's incredibly peaceful. I was going along very happily with the whole factory thing and it working and all that sort of thing, and then I became ill. I had a long chat with a surgeon and his two assistants, who had a look at me and said, "There is something seriously wrong with your inside. We can't find out what it is. We'll have to go in and operate." And then I had a long chat with an Irish night sister who was absolutely wonderful and just talked to me about death, and nobody had done that before. And she was so incredibly matter-of-fact and assessed my chances of maybe 50-50 it would be. And she was absolutely lovely, and we talked long into the night about what was going to happen and all that. And the next thing I knew, I was down in the I suppose he must have been the chap who did the anaesthetic. And I was at pains to tell him I was 12 stone and would he please give me enough of his medicine. Anyway, the next thing I knew was waking up on the operating table. And I looked up, and the surgeon and his two assistants that I'd been talking to the surgeon turned to his assistant and says, "Pity we're too late, chaps." And I thought, that's odd, because I had all my senses, and I suddenly realised I wasn't seeing him from the operating table. I was seeing him from up top, and it was extraordinary to look down and see me lying on the table. And I had absolutely no fear, very strange. Sort of really seriously interested in what was happening, no fear at all. And then I saw the nurses clearing up the place and starting to switch the lights out. And the next thing was that I seemed to go further up and into a thick mist. And again, there was no fear. It was total peace, total calm, total acceptance, a little tinge of regret at leaving the body that had been so good to me for so long. And then gradually the mist formed into a tunnel. And my tunnel was a great long thing with aluminium sheets and sort of peach light behind each sheet, going back and back and back and back. And I wasn't me. I was a long aluminium tube with rounded ends, and in a place of total peace, no coercion to do anything, absolute compassion, total understanding. And then I became aware of a vague light at the end of the tunnel. As soon as my mind was aware of that, the tube started to travel very slowly along the tunnel. And when it got to the end, it stopped. And then I came out of it as a babe about 3 years old, probably. And probably with a nappy on, if you like. And it was just an expression of total innocence, really. And I remember there was no fear at all. I remember seeing this area in front of me, which I can only describe as like Carrara marble floor, and no people and no buildings and nothing like I'd ever seen. Sort of misty forms that were vaguely architectural. And then the beings. I was aware of beings, but I couldn't see them or anything. But they were there, and their minds were totally compassionate, total understanding of how I felt. And it was extraordinary because I wasn't in the least bit afraid. I was curious, and I really wanted to know what was happening. And I was aware of the voices saying, "This is," and this is with the language. I haven't got the proper language for this. This is the entrance to where we are. That's the nearest thing I can get. These are some of our concepts, and if you can contribute to these concepts, or if you can even understand them, you're very welcome to come in and join us. And I was given the idea, and I can't even tell you what the concepts were. I mean, it was to do with the colour of music and all sorts of things that are way beyond our five senses, really. And they said, you've got all the experience of all of your lifetimes here. You've got all the time in the universe to make up your mind. And I looked at some of these concepts and I thought, I don't even understand. And I said, if you like, I think I ought to go back. And there was a universal chortle, not of laughing at me, but laughing with me. And they said, we think you should. So I got into the tube again and started hurtling down the tunnel. And I was aware that at the other end, I could only describe them as great shards of glass, broken glass at the end. And I thought, I'm going to come back into a great deal of pain. But in the event, I went hurtling through these things without any effect at all. And the next thing I remember was somebody tapping on my skull and saying, is there anyone in there, Mr. Miller? And I was desperate to tell them about the great joy that I'd had in my journey up to the other place. And I couldn't, because I was absolutely asleep, and it was an extraordinary experience, and I came back with a totally different set of values. I had every sense was tweaked up a degree, if you like, and everything I touched, everything I heard, everything I saw was as I had never seen it before or never heard it before. And I was also totally aware of the energy of everything and the connection between everything. I could almost see the joins, if you like, of the energy lines. But I'm not suggesting for a moment that you have to go through the death experience to have your perceptions moved up to another level, because there are people perfectly, and millions of perfectly normal people whose perceptions are at that level already. So I'm not claiming to be anything unique at all. It's just that I'm more sensitive, I think, to earth energy, which I've been specialising in for the last 25 years, certainly than I was before. I decided at that time that I did not want to go on with the life I'd had before. because I could see all the things wrong with it. And I came down to Cornwall down here and sat up here and recuperated in remarkable time. The implication is that, okay, yes, there are other realities going on at the same time as we are existing here. According to the scientific world, the other realities do exist. I mean, the latest stuff on quantum physics is almost a proof that other realities do exist. These scientists at one time wouldn't have listened to experiences which imply some sort of other sense, or a spiritual sense, if you like. But now, of course, they're intent on finding what human consciousness is and what our real relationship to, and what is reality, what is our relationship with the cosmos. And they are the people who are beginning to be supportive about these sort of experiences. The trouble is that their findings and my findings, you know, are not getting out to mainstream, and there are millions of people who just dismiss these things. No, it's an absolute nonsense. All I ask you to do is to consider the possibility that they could be true. Don't dismiss it. Just think about it. I'm making some dowsing rods here because I'm quite into dowsing, and these are rods that I'm making for particular people because I've taken an outline of their hand and I make them to fit the hand. Dowsing is one of the doorways into finding an extra sense of some kind. This is the sacred site of Bus Cawanon, and it's the place where I really started to learn about earth energy. It is extremely complex, and these old people knew more about it than I will ever know. Very difficult to describe what earth energy is. Anything that you try and put in a pigeonhole, you're oversimplifying. This is a very, very complex structure. It's a combination of the Earth's nervous system and its meridians. It's exactly the same sort of system as we have. And scientists, of course, have measured the difference of the energy inside the circle and outside, and it is measurable. So there is a difference. So earth energy does exist. And it's not something we're having to prove now. It's something we have to probably improve the instrumentation to measure it. The Japanese are really seriously trying to develop some sort of electronic system because they realize the importance of the profound effect that earth energy has on our being. There's something old and ancestral about blacksmithing that I discovered the art really after I'd been through the whole commercial rat race. So I came in here about 25 years ago and made the first dowsing rod. It was incredible because I'd just been to a talk with somebody who was a consummate dowser, old Colin Bloy, who started the Fountain International. I went to him and I asked him to point me towards a dowser in Cornwall. And he said, because I wanted to work on earth energy, he introduced me to earth energy. And he said, do it yourself. And I felt totally rejected. I thought he'd shut a door on me, but he hadn't actually, because 6 months later I knocked out the dowsing rod I use now actually. I've hammered at this rod and with some anger actually, still at Colin Bloy for and I thought, well, you know, all right, I'll do that. And I used this and I walked up the road between my house and the hill at the back and crossed the line between the hill and St. Michael's Mount. And I said, is there any earth energy flowing between the hill and St. Michael's Mount? And I got just that little flicker, but it was doing it on its own. And that totally changed my life. And in 25 years, I'm still learning. As soon as you think you know something about the Earth's field and the way its energy reacts, you discover a whole new path. It's a totally living being, and it's got moods like we all have. The line actually goes through the forge. In fact, that I have to say is why I've got the forge there, because it's right smack in the middle of the Athena energy, and it's very, very strong, creative female energy, and it's a great place to work. Anybody in the world can find an energy line if they acknowledge that it's there to start with, and if they realise its existence, then a dowsing rod will show it up, provided they reach the level of concentration you need to be sure that that's what you're finding. And what you have to do when you're looking for an energy line is absolute total concentration on exactly what you're looking for. This is the difficult bit. Absolute total concentration. You've got to cut out everything else in the world. So show me where the nearest edge of this energy line is. Now that's the nearest edge. And you go to the search position again, and you ask for the centre of the line because you want to find the width. And the rods register where the centre of the line is, which is that way. As soon as they're parallel. And you put them to the search position again, and you ask for the outside edge, the far edge. Now this is quite a wide line actually. It doesn't matter what you're dowsing for, as long as you're totally concentrated on finding that and nothing else. And that's the difficult bit with dowsing. The degree of concentration we need is much higher than anything else we do in our normal lives. All earth energy is benign. Sometimes there are some uncomfortable bits, but they have been influenced by people's consciousness here, rather than there's nothing evil or satanic about earth energy at all. But sometimes, of course, because these lines are made up of lots and lots of different frequencies, sometimes there is a frequency that's uncomfortable. And people very often get in touch with us and say, is there anything you can do about this, because I can't go into that room. We have a fairly close relationship with the management. We don't decide what should happen. All we do is point out that somebody is uncomfortable with that particular frequency of earth energy, and please can they do something about it. And 99.9 times out of 100 they will say, yes, fine, we can sort it out, but we'll sort it out in a way that won't harm anybody else. Usually when we are called out, I take Baal on, because she actually is, as a female, is sensitive to things that don't register with me. Sometimes, of course, there are entities, if you like, which are just us trapped in a different time. This was an important one, because as a 5-year-old child who had got to the stage where they were being deeply disturbed by an entity who was making noises with her toys.
When we first moved in, I didn't notice there was a problem, but my little girl started saying a few things like, for instance, what's that man doing behind you, Mummy? And with the stairs here, when we used to walk up the stairs, she'd stop halfway and say, stand back and let somebody pass. So I thought it was a little game. But as the months went on, I started to hear things. This is Saskia's bedroom, and this is the mobile, which is the first thing I heard that I couldn't explain. I was in bed reading, and I heard this noise, which is quite, maybe a little louder than that. As somebody had brushed past it, so I assumed Saskia's on her way into the bedroom. She didn't turn up, so I came to check on her, and she's fast asleep. So the next day I decided to come up here and jiggle the bed about, lay on the bed and see if it would create the same noise. And when I couldn't explain this, I literally sat on the bed and thought, something's not right, there's something going on. I was reading her a story one night and she said, it's much too scary for me to sleep in here now. I said, what do you mean? She said, there's someone comes in my room at night, I can hear them walking around. So I tried to say maybe it was the birds on the roof, or Mummy coming to check you. She said, no, I'm on my own and I know there's somebody here because I can hear them breathing. And they wake me up and I don't like it and I'm very frightened. On the landing outside here, because it's a wooden floor, we could hear footsteps going between my room and Saskia's room. Sort of almost sounded like they were running sometimes. And in her bedroom here, because I had a baby monitor on, I could hear her little toys being played with. If I'd heard something, I would come in and peek through the door and she'd be fast asleep. It started to really frighten me. I didn't want to be in the house in the evening on my own. Hamish said he would come and have a look round for us.
All these things are energy forms. They have no particular material existence here. They can exist anywhere at all. The big point about these is they are desperately lonely. They're just us at a slightly different level. They're lost. They're desperately lonely. They've nobody to talk to at all. And what they try and do is summon up enough energy to impinge on one of our five senses. And they will do anything just to say, for God's sake, I'm here, will somebody help? So once you've located them in this thing, there is a way of communicating with them to help them to realise where they are and to realise their absolute ambition to get out of here and back to the sort of life where they could be at the next level. They often go off without even saying goodbye, which is slightly worrying because you've gone to all this effort and suddenly, whoosh, they've gone. And the people in the house, of course, suddenly realise that they have gone. There is a fundamental difference in the house. There's no reason for fear anyway. There wasn't before. But people are concerned, obviously, about bumps in the night and things like that.
When he came down and said that they had found somebody, it was a big relief actually. It was I felt quite emotional knowing that there had been somebody here, obviously trying to get help. But from then onwards, felt a lot more peaceful upstairs. It's like a different place, all thanks to him. Happy house.
There was the case of the Mount Avon Hotel where there was a great deal of disturbance about with one of the energies, and people were feeling ill and depressed, and it was having a serious effect on their whole way of living.
We bought the hotel because of its fantastic views. It dates back to 1840 and there's a lot of history and there's a lot of human footprint there, and the energy wasn't that clean. You know, in places, you know, being quite sensitive, you know, I'd actually feel physically sick in some areas, and although I'm not psychic, even I could see different sort of discarnate figures like shadows wandering about, and guests would often sort of ask me in the mornings, were their rooms haunted? Bless him, Hamish came and did an awful lot of work for me, helped clear the energy lines where they were really thick and sick, and also did some rescue medium work, and now, you know, people, you know, so many people now comment on how wonderful the energy is here, and that's because it's been cleared and the energy that was naturally here is just so beautiful. But until Hamish cleared it, we really couldn't enjoy it. I don't think we would get the amount of repeat business that we get, and so much of our business is repeat business, and you know, it's because of the way it makes people feel, the sense of peace and relaxation that's available there now. See, Hamish has got some hotline to higher management, and don't ask me how he does it, but bless him, he does it beautifully.
Most times we find it's just a discomfort caused to the whoever is living in the house by one particular frequency of energy. And we just ask the management to change the frequency from a disturbing one to a healing one. So we do a double whammy. They feel so much better.
We live in a beautiful bungalow, but it never felt comfortable. I had permanent headaches. I felt depressed. I could never lift myself out of this depression. But once Hamish had cleared it, then the whole vibration changed. I felt joy afterwards. I felt totally elated.
While I was working with other people outside around to try and help them with their energy problems, I realised that I'd still an awful lot to learn. And I was experimenting in this room, actually. And during the experiment, I found that there was a little energy centre here. There's an absolute basic form of an energy centre in that it has a spiral, a vortex coming out of it, and always there are straight radials of energy coming out of it. And I found that the total count was 14. Everybody can be involved in this because everybody has an energy centre of this sort of kind, either a strong one or a weaker one, in their own room. It seems to respond to their consciousness. If you start working with it and just acknowledge it, like you would acknowledge your dog or your cat or something like that, and stroke it, and just say hi. It's not a po-faced thing to do, just say hi and acknowledge the fact that there is a pulsing energy centre, a live energy centre here. It will respond to your thoughts. You must understand that the earth has a consciousness, and it reacts to our consciousness. And the simplest way to find out how it responds is to periodically count the radials coming out of it. You see, even while we've been filming here, we've been putting our attention on this little spot and recognizing it, and that's all it needs. It starts responding right away. So it'd be worth, we started with 14 radials when the shooting started. So I'll just have a check and see how many there are now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Hello. It still sends shivers down my spine. The implication behind a change like that, because 3 of us have been thinking about it, just consider the enormous implications behind the fact that you can communicate, or your consciousness can communicate with something live that's pulsing on the earth. Just heading now for Marks Bay, and very shortly St Michael's Mount will come into view. And St Michael's Mount is an extremely important part of my life, right from the initial stages of coming to Cornwall, and has continued to be, because it was instrumental in starting off the research on the Michael line, which goes from, we now understand, goes from Carnley Ball and comes through St Michael's Mount and goes right across the country for 300 miles. And I became really interested in what happened to the Michael line, and joined up with Paul Broadhurst to write the book called Sun and Serpent. And this was the initiation to come over here and steep ourselves in the energy here. I was able to tune in to the particular band of frequencies that is the Michael line, and practiced in finding them by being driven in the dark in a van so that I couldn't see where we were, so I could tune in and pick up these energies absolutely anywhere, in any weather conditions. And that I spent 6 months doing that before we even started doing the research of the book. St Michael's Mount, it's such a stimulating place. There's a recorded story now. It was 3rd or 4th century BC, and it was at night, and there were 4 fishermen at the high tide rowing back across, and they suddenly, one of them looked up in the front there, and he was astonished to see this bright light right on the end of the island on the right hand side there. And they thought, of course, at that time it was a manifestation of the Archangel St. Michael. And I think the facts behind it are that at that point there are 4 major energy lines meeting, and they are all different frequencies. They can live together quite well, but I think just at that moment they probably got in sync. And the impact of the vortex of energy there affected their eyesight, if you like, their vision, and they saw it as a great big bright light. It was a vortex of energy. Very, very few places in the world there are major pairs of energy lines meet. And where they meet are really sacred places, very special places indeed, and they have a profound effect on all our biomagnetic fields around us. And all of us feel the difference. People come over here, they walk across the causeway here, and they go up there, and they come back from St Michael's Mount feeling absolutely great. And it's because all their energy fields around them, the biomagnetic fields, are all caressed and beautifully balanced. And that's why it's so important that we must find out about Earth energy, because it does affect our behavior enormously. the right-hand side there, just behind that, there's a flat platform just behind the little V notch. And we found a power point which is exactly the same as the one we found in the cottage. So the center of the power point does the center of the energy, and we found this amazing, almost true, this is not true, but Fibonacci spiral. Difficult for me to do accurately. Spirals are notoriously difficult to draw, but from there and from the center there were these radials coming out in exactly the same way. And it was very difficult to count these because the whole thing was pulsing. It was so powerful. And as soon as we started observing it, I did a count of these things. It was quite difficult actually. It's a very narrow platform. And I kept going around and trying to get the number. And there's a 50-foot drop into the sea. And of course you forget when you're watching this rod. And it was pulsing so much, it was very difficult to get an accurate count, because as soon as you started to consciously acknowledge that there was a power point there, it started to vary, and this spiral started to tighten up. But it's certainly one of the most powerful energy centres in the UK.